Miriam, Notrim Rebecca Yakha. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rebecca Tortis. I am Lusenyo Kauia and Assiniboine Sioux. I'm joining you today from Claremont, California, which is the unceded territory of the Tongva people. I want to first start by welcoming you to the 2021 Eco Farm Conference. This session is titled California Indigenous Perspectives on Ethics, Occupation, and Land Management. I am excited and humbled to host this panel presentation today, or panel discussion. I am proud to serve as the co-founder of the California Tribal Fund, which is a program of First Nations Development Institute. The mission of the California Tribal Fund is to invest in the viability and visibility of California tribal nations, communities, and families. We are committed to eternalizing our cultures and tradition while honoring the historical fortitude of our ancestors. It is with this mission in mind that I am honored to serve again as the moderator for today's panel as we discuss the politics of place, Indigenous rights, and land-based practices in historical, ecological, and cultural contexts. And I am very honored to be joined today by our panelists, Deb Murillo, Leah Matafarwa, Sarah Biscara-Dilly, and Brianna Vasquez. And I wanted to just start with having a quick introduction of each of our panelists. And Brianna, can we start with you? And you just have to unmute yourself. There we go.
Sorry, had to unmute myself. Yeah, so I'm Brianna Vasquez. I currently live in Marina, California. I graduated from UC Santa Cruz. My background is in biology, a brief background in land restoration. And I currently work doing cannabis research for a local farm in the Salinas Valley. And I'm from the northern Chumash coastal band, or sorry, tribe.
Thanks so much, Brianna. Sarah, how about let's go to you next?
Hatu mita Sarah Biscara-Dilly, Wamitana Yakitanas Muntuhin Katichu, Kistu Titu Katakatla, Ni Sithala, Wasita Kawayu, Wa Etzmal, Wasita Kaka, Wa Elewehe, Wa Asaram, Wa Casas Grandes, Wazina Pequoro, Wa Santa Catarina, Wa Sikpats, Wa Waimeya, Wasita Kawa. So Huchu needs Putichu Tasitana Chocheño, Mitakana, Misakana, Wa Mi. Nahona needs to teach you Wayaki Jono, Wayaki Danas Core Group, University of California, Davis Native American Studies. I'm letting you know that my name is Sarah Biscara-Dilly. I'm speaking the language of the people of Tilshini, also known as San Luis Obispo, California. I'm letting you know that I come from good people, from villages throughout our homelands, from just north and just east of us, from central Mexico, from Sweden, and also from the big island of Hawaii. I'm letting you know that my house is at Huchun, also known as Oakland, California, in unratified Treaty E region, in the land of the Chochenyo-speaking people. And I'm telling you that I listen, learn, and know in my homelands, my family from the language core team, and as a PhD candidate in Native American Studies at UC Davis.
Thank you so much. Leah, how about you?
Mitu Leah Matafarwa, and I am in Jemez Pueblo, which is the homeland of my husband's people. And I do multiple things. I am a professor at the Institute of American Indian Arts, but I'm also a full-time artist and tend to work in place-based arts as they relate to our places and the materials we use.
Thank you so much, Leah. And Deb.
Mete Deborah Murillo, Yaksua Wakisi Murillo, Kistia, yakistono wa chia sit ko the kawa sit kala elewe sit wala wa wiksoksi mitia sikko chi chipu yak chashina mimicha sikko chi yak sakwa ki chipu chachina. I'm speaking, I pretty much reiterated what Sarah said in terms of myself and Sarah were from the same villages and we're cousins. And then I'm cousins to Brianna and Leah also. So I said what families I was from and the villages that I'm from. And I said that I was happy to be here today. I'm very happy to be here today. I'm very happy and proud to work with a team of people that are here today. I also wanted to say that today I'm thinking today because I've been given permission by my father, who was the head of our families and spokespersons of all of our families. And when he was ready to leave, he said, "You can speak now. You can get interviewed. You can say what you want to say." My father never allowed himself to be interviewed or to speak out about things. He only spoke about the importance of family, responsibilities, and our relationships. My grandfather taught me everything, and he learned throughout his life and today. Throughout his life, he taught me everything throughout his life. And so today, I ask you to be patient and to listen and to try and understand how we live and our responsibilities and how we respect our world. Thank
you so much, Deb. And I just wanted to set the context kind of, we all know each other. So this is going to be a wonderful in terms of we've known each other. We have vibrant relationships that are already there. So you'll see the way that we speak to each other is very much like, friends and family. So, you're in for a treat. So I guess we will just dive right into our discussions. And I wanted to just start with some questions. And I think that we'll have maybe Sarah start with, this idea of right now, in the last year, wildfires here in California, they have really fostered a renewed interest in some of our traditional ecological knowledge practices, which we commonly refer to TEK practices. These practices related to fire have been really highlighted in mainstream media and popular discourse lately. But I find and we find that they are always lacking a full context of the complexities of these practices. And I thought maybe we could speak to a little bit about what gets filtered or not addressed historically as part of this narrative when it's presented in the media.
Thank you for that framework. I think that's a really generative way to approach this. One of the things that came up in discussion when we were kind of imagining what we wanted this panel to look like, we kept coming back to this absence of context. So to kind of kick off the panel, I'm going to give you all a crash course in California land tenure history, particularly the policies and the different areas of occupation that have facilitated the kinds of relationships to the land, as well as the objectification of the land that continues to this day. So let's just begin here. All land within the contemporary boundaries of California is unceded. This means that the United States broke its own laws to bring California into the Union. So this is not out of the ordinary. Of the over 500 treaties that were negotiated between Native nations and the US government, only 370 were ratified, and every single one of them has been violated in some way, and others just outright broken. The path to private land ownership throughout settler nations like the US, Canada, Aotearoa, New Zealand, Australia, and many other places is intimately tied to the rupture and ongoing dispossession of Indigenous peoples from their places. Any privately owned land or land stewarded by non-Indigenous peoples actively benefits from this structural truth. This includes organic farms, working ranches, national monuments, family homes, state parks, urban and rural areas. So how did we get into this mess that now implicates every single one of us, regardless of who our peoples are and where we are living? California has a particularly unique history. It's a relatively brief colonial history, around 252 years of kind of place-based occupation, compared to our people's long histories that extend to the beginning of time. Indigenous peoples within and beyond what is now California adapted to multiple waves of incursion and laws placed upon us upwards of 15 wave of occupation begins in 1769 with the mission period. So if people have had any education about this, it's typically through the 4th grade mission project in California state schools, California public schools, that is no longer a requirement of the curriculum as of 2018. So we have kids who are still being taught the mission program. It's not a requirement of the curriculum, so please interrupt the normalization of this narrative. So most people hear about this time period through these romanticized stories about religious or social redemption. But the mission era was a formalization of extractive economic systems and colonial expansion. So industries developed during the mission period, including the cultivation of grapes, cattle ranching, monoculture farming, continue to be foundational economic structures throughout the state. This led to mass forced relocation or incarceration within the boundaries of the missions, and that had a devastating impact on foodways, material culture, and social networks that extended throughout and beyond the boundaries of a state. Foodways that depend on our continued and complex interaction with the land across ecosystems through incarceration at the missions and being forced to work for these industries that had just been supplanted there, made a devastating impact on our food systems to begin with. They also didn't see the ways that California Indigenous people were and had been participating in agriculture, traditional ecological knowledge, collaborative relationships with the environment. It wasn't legible from a European gaze as being agriculture. And so that's something that we continually see, even in how these conversations continue to this day. So in 1833, the missions were secularized. And then this is kind of the era of the southern parts of California being within Mexican occupation. So this is where you again see another wave of privatization, but also the continued emergence of farms and farming throughout California. So this manifested in a lot of ways, in particular in our community. A lot of our relatives, like everybody that's on this call, had people who kind of used labor as a resistance to that relocation. So even though we no longer had the uninterrupted stewardship of our land, people continued to work on farms that had stolen the land from under us. That was a way for us to maintain our responsibilities to our homeland, and to, even if it was in a marginal context, to be able to continue to practice our food systems and our agriculture. A huge impact of this time period is the continued introduction of cattle. So this has an extremely disruptive effect on biodiversity throughout the state and our traditional foodways, whether it was from trampling large swaths of land, eating massive amounts of staple foods like acorn, and interrupting the reproductive cycles of many of our ecosystems. The diversion of water sources to support farming methods that speak over the agency of the land rather than working in collaboration negatively impacted our fisheries, marshlands, and changed the landscape drastically. A perfect example of this is what the Central Valley looks like now. Buena Vista Lake was a huge, Tule Lake, just on the other side of our mountains. These are our neighbors directly to the east. And when you look at what that valley looks like now, it's completely flattened. You don't see the diversity of seed producing plants or marshlands or any of that. It's just been completely depleted. And as many of you know, the water table is so low that it's causing the valley to sink. As this is getting adjusted to, United States occupation begins in 1848. So a lot of people are familiar with that, kind of following the extraction of gold. But it also was another wave of policy that had violent impacts on our communities. So an Act for the Government and Protection of Indians is a law that was passed in April of 1850. So it was about 9 months before California was officially a state. This is one of the first laws that you really see in text outlining our land management practices. So it outlawed our farming, fishing, hunting, and land-based practices through kind of projecting an idea of vagrancy onto us. It also explicitly outlawed cultural burns. But this part of what made this the most devastating is that it created a system of human trafficking and enslavement throughout the state that continued well after the abolition of slavery throughout the US. So being charged with vagrancy, i.e. being out on the land and practicing your foodways or going out to gather or maintaining your fish traps, if a settler saw you on the land unaccompanied by another settler, they could take you before a justice of the peace. You were unable to testify as a Native person against a settler in court, and they would be auctioned off to the highest bidder. Then California officially becomes a state. Just after that time, there are 18 treaties that are negotiated throughout the state of California. The treaty that impacts a large part of our homeland, Treaty C, was negotiated with people in like the Sierra Nevada mountains, like on the other side of the valley. So many people had no idea that these treaties were even negotiated. This is what I mentioned at the beginning of the talk when I say all lands within the contemporary boundaries of California is unceded. So even though these 18 treaties were negotiated, allegedly promising lands, mostly in the Central Valley of California, to Native people as reservations, the treaties were not ratified. And then Congress put a gag order on them until 1904 during a period of time where it was legal to capture and enslave Native people, and there were also bounties put on Native people's heads. The state of California between 1850 and 1859, this is not a number that's adjusted for inflation. They gave $1.3 million to settlers for bounties on Native people, because if you could clear the land of Indigenous people, you could claim that land as an extension of your private property. So this was only addressed in 1928, where they did a special census of California Native people that resulted in 2 payments in 1953 and 1972 to any of the people who survived that 30-year period of that document being created. 2 payments of $150 in exchange for all lands in California. So in order to have these critical conversations about how to enter into partnerships with one another and how to really turn to Indigenous knowledges, which again, extend far beyond the brief 250 years of ecological knowledge of a place, you have to reckon with these histories that are still happening. Yeah, and I think the questions that are going to be asked later on will hopefully kind of trouble some of those ideas and deepen the conversation. So I'm going to step off of my soapbox. I hope that was informative, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I think that is one of the things that for me personally irks me the most, is that everything that you have just said, we could spend years unpacking and, going and learning about this history and having these vibrant conversations, and all of that is always, I see it just mushed into 1 or 2 sentences when I'm reading you know, these articles about TEK practices, and they don't address like all of this history of displacement. And I had wrote while you were talking some notes, just one of the things that spoke to me, because I think about my grandparents and what they did as labor as a resistance to relocation. And I know that when we were preparing for this, we had talked about how we view our relationship with the land differently in terms of like a traditional ecosystem, and how it's more of just like it's a concentric relationship. Like I know Deb and I have conversations all the time where she's like, you need to see the land and the land needs to see you. So I don't have like a specific question related to that, but I kind of want to unpack that a little bit more, that idea of how we view relationships with land, before we even get into, what does it look like to engage with us as tribal people? Because there's context, historical context, and then there's also that context of, how do we view land, and what inherited knowledge are each one of us are born with. So I will open it to any of the panelists that would like to address that question. Oh. Deb, you got to unmute yourself. Oh.
I raised my
I
hand.
guess I can say something real quick but I think
yeah, Brianna, I was going to ask Brianna. Brianna, did you want to go?
Yeah, I saw your hand go up, and I wasn't sure if that meant you wanted.
No,
to say
I'm saying like let
yes.
Brianna go. Let Brianna go.
Yeah, so I think how we view the land, and in regards to kind of the first question going into that, like I think for most of us, especially a lot of the tribes, including ours, that we don't have land in our homelands. And so for us, like the ultimate goal, I mean, really for a lot of us, which seems, I mean, I was just having this conversation with a coworker yesterday when I explained what I was speaking on today, that like one of our ultimate goals and like aspirations to hopefully see in our lifetimes is to get land in our homeland and to steward it and to restore it, and not necessarily use it for like capitalistic purposes and like profit, but just to have it and to like take care of our I think so many of us, that's just like just in us, right? Like we just want to be able to steward something and bring that back. And then I did want to touch on, I really like that the 4th grade mission project was brought up, because I think so many people like just don't realize how twisted it is. I think to teach that to 4th graders, including those of us who, are descendants of tribes, and, it's a requirement for us to build missions, and it's put out that, we helped them build the missions, and it was all nice and friendly, when in reality, our ancestors were enslaved and forced to build these missions, and, really not great, terrible things happened to our ancestors. And it's not framed that way. It's framed as, it's romanticized. But yeah, I think that's all I
touch. Leah, you're muted.
I think that Brianna and set the frameworks in terms of discussing our relationships to our homelands that was so disrupted with the mission system, and really enslaving us to change the way that we work and engage with land, right? So we're forced into farming, we're forced into capitalization of our land, and so to land takes a shift during those time periods. And for those tribal communities that still don't have land, it's really hard to revitalize that practice on a community level when you don't have the space to do so. Individuals do it, and we usually carve it out through our relationships with either private landowners or through the many hoops and bureaucracies we have to jump through, right? So if we want to go gathering, if we want to have ceremony, if we want to do any of these things, we have to jump through all these bureaucracies that prevent us from even accessing materials or having a relationship with our homelands. It's so hard to go through 10 different agencies, 10 different liaisons who change positions so frequently. And so it's hard to develop relationships with these institutions like Fish and Game, Coastal Commission, state parks, county parks, federal lands. And so when we say the word land back, we really mean it. And it's important for our communities to have land back. Many of the tribes in those 18 treaties still do not have land or the recognition that was illegally taken from them. And it's important for us to recognize that when we also say land back, many of our communities are not looking to monetize or develop these lands. We're looking to steward those lands and to have a place for those relationships to heal and grow for our younger generations who've never had access to their homelands. And I think that that's an important part in terms of looking at land back and looking at it through the lens of not having land, and how do we pass down traditional ecological knowledge when we have to sometimes illegally trespass or access areas just to teach our children about these plants or about our ecosystems. Deb, I don't know, I think you probably have some more to say on this as well.
Yeah, I just think that our value system is extremely different from Western society, and Western society as a whole is pretty much an imperialistic value system. Our people embrace our value system, which is respect and trust, shared culture, worldview, sustainability. We believe we're all related and we're all connected with each other. So we respect each other, and we wouldn't do anything to any being that we wouldn't do to ourselves. We believe that we're all related, and we have responsibility to our homeland. We are owned by the land. We are tied to the land. The land knows us and we know the land. We have relationships with the land, and we've had relationships with the land for over 10,000 years. And it's a strong relationship because we're all family. We are gifted from the world, and life gifts us. So we need to know when things are ready. We need to observe the world. We need to know the seasons. We need to have relationships with all life so we can prepare for all the seasons. Every relative has its purpose, and it will tell you when it's ready. We respect what we are given. We act right. If we don't act right, then there are serious consequences. We don't think of things like as an event, like, oh, we're going to go out and pick berries. We're going to go out on a picnic and pick berries. There's protocols, there's rules, there's responsibilities that come with things. We use everything from life that gives us. It's about respect, balance, and giving. We have protocols and processes prior to gathering and hunting, and even afterwards. And I think lastly, our religion is not separated like in Western world. There's no such thing for a term for the Western world thought of religion. It's not separate. So we don't like, oh, I'm gonna go to church on Sunday. It's fused into our daily life. It's surrounded with prayer. And everything that we do, protection, health, prosperity, good luck, good harvest, when we're cooking, when we're eating, when we're coming together, we're always in that place of being. And it's our life, and it's what connects us to the land. And it's how we see the world different. There's not an animate or inanimate thing. We believe that everything's alive. whether it's a rock or whether it's a tree or plant, they are living beings, and they're not a resource or a thing to be used. And there's always we're always giving back as a gift, and we always pay homage to all life. After listening, I think after listening to our community on the panel, our colleagues, I think it's really important to understand that, most of us are all living on stolen land. Since contact, Western society has exercised a very deviant treatment towards our communities. And they've stolen from us. They've ignored our treaties for their own economic gain. They've killed us. They've enslaved us. They've hunted us down and utilized their own government to legalize this systematic, I guess I'm going to say, killing machine behavior towards us. And I think my colleagues here today, they've articulated this very well. So I think what we can do is we can say, because I know that Rebecca asked, how is that different? But, for me, I believe like either I can sit in a barrel of mud and cry, or I can get out of that barrel of mud and move forward. And we come from people that we move forward. We have to find solutions. So to ask everyone here, where do you start or how can you help? I think the first thing is to first acknowledge that you are on unceded land. And we need to teach our children whose land that they live on and acknowledge homeland people and help communities with the skill set that you have that can help us become sovereign. Teach young ones that the land is not here for you to exploit. It's here like everything else is here. It takes care of you. We breathe air every morning. Where does the air come from? And how hard did our world work to make our day happen? For us, we see all plant life and the work that they've done so we can be here today. And our seasons, they're perfect examples of responsibility that they take on for us as human beings. And it's our responsibility as human beings to do our part and to learn from them and listen to them. And have a world for many generations ahead. I think funding truly helps us. Funding is we need funding, we need help. So donate to homeland tribes, donate to land conservancies and nonprofits that help Indian communities. Money is needed for legal services, protection rights of sacred sites, lands. Give us a seat at the table, but listen to our words and be open to understanding our beliefs and support us by contributing funding to our California Indian people that are landless and need a homeland to ensure sustainability for all life. It's important to recognize we've been here and we've taken care of the world for 10,000 years. So we know what we're doing. We just need some economic help. Understand Western and values are so different from ours. I personally believe that they violate our natural laws that we live by. And here's a perfect example. In our homeland, there's a county park that's part of our mountains, and the citizens want to have the park open at night so they can ride dirt bikes and go off trail at night in the homelands. They want to climb our sacred mountains. They use the premise that it's theirs, and they pay taxes, so they have rights to the land and rights to open space. For us, it's disrespectful to the beings that live there, and there's no consideration for the balance that's required to sustain our life. I believe today we're in a place where it's time to give back, and it's time for us to get back our sovereignty. All of our family members have paid a very high price. So the 5 of us could be sitting here today and speak the truth. So today, I personally make a call to take on responsibility and help us make that change with Indigenous communities by helping us in any way that you can, whether it's your skill set that you can bring and contribute to communities, a monetary contribution to communities, or just, you know, educate your families in terms of that you are on unceded land, and what steps or measures can you take to help our communities. Sali.
Thank you so much, Deb. I think that what I was hearing when I was hearing Leah, you know, Brianna and Sarah and yourself talk is, you know, we've been discussing kind of like, you know, this idea of, you know, a knowledge base and, you know, some of the things that when we talk about the, you know, time immemorial, it literally means there's no, we don't think about time, I guess, as like a beginning and the end. It's just we're here. Like I know that like in Korea, we don't have like a future in the past. It's we exist in the moment. And you know, a lot of the things that we're discussing is, you know, people want when we work with as tribal groups and tribal people, when we work with outside agencies, whether they be, you know, state or federal agencies like national parks, state parks, or we work with private landowners, or we work with cities and municipalities, you know, people want to have this little tiny bit of expertise that they want to share as non-tribal people with other people, and they want to, you know, kind of claim, you know, it's for lack of a better term, because it is just claim, you know, this knowledge. And we live in this world where, you know, people watch a film, or people Google something, or they go to a 2-day workshop, you know, which is taught, and suddenly they also, you know, feel like they should have a voice and a seat at this table. So you know, we talk about kind of like, what does it actually look like to mean to ethically engage with tribal groups and people, you know, where there's this idea where everyone expects or deserves access to this knowledge. Like, I invited you, Deb, or I invited you, Leah, or I invited you, Sarah, I invited you, Brianna. And because I invited you, you should just, you know, for lack of a better term, lay all of your tribal knowledge and your inherited knowledge here, because I'm an advocate for you and we're friends. So, you know, now you should share that information with me. And we promised each other when we started this that we would just keep it real, you know. So, you know, that being said, like, do you have examples of, you know, if you've worked with an agency that you felt was really positive, or also like places where people could have done a lot better? I know that here, you know, in Claremont, we pride ourselves on being like a liberal town, and, you know, we have places where people can gather, and, you know, you can gather at the colleges if you pull up the website and you fill out 3 pages of, you know, this. I see Leah going like this. You know, if you pull up the website and you fill out 3 pages of what you're going to gather, and you're only allowed to gather 2 pounds of it, and they'll make sure they check it. And if you gather more than that, they literally throw it out. I've seen them with my own eyes. They're just like, oh, we'll just put that in the compost, because of whatever, you know, processes and procedures they have. So not only do you have to, you know, as a young person, sure, I can pull up a website and do all these things, but the people that are gathering that are going to teach me are elders, you know. So that would be a situation where I would say, okay, you can do better than this. So I would love to hear, you know, real life examples of maybe you have worked with an agency or a person or a you know, landowner, where you have felt like, okay, this is a reciprocal relationship. And hopefully that makes sense. Does anybody want to just Leah, maybe?
Yeah, you know, and I don't want to put anybody on blast. So, but in the past, our team has worked with institutions, and you know, one of the things they wanted as part of the project was a plant or herb garden, and they wanted us to not only label it in our language, but provide what the plants do, how we use them, and all this information. And then they wanted to put it in a class on campus and have it taught by their instructors, and not include, and we have a lot of professors in our community that are very capable of teaching, of course. And just the fact that they didn't want to pay or include our people as instructors, but just wanted kind of to get the information so that they could develop a program, you know, was somewhat problematic, and we really had to push back on that. And luckily there were people higher up in the system that recognized how problematic it was, and you know, definitely sided with our concerns. But you know, this is just one example out of many, and sometimes it works well. You know, it can be a simple work well, but those are, I think, for me at least, far and few in between. I don't know if anybody else has any good examples of what worked well. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah,
and
Sarah, go
Debbie.
ahead.
I guess the examples that I have of those kinds of collaborations happening successfully are very intimate. I think about the ways that, you know, the things that everyone has brought up thus far is like a completely different or a dissonant worldview that kind of views the land, that views Indigenous peoples, that views our material culture, that views our knowledge as something that people are somehow entitled to. I turn often to our cultural and social protocols when I'm engaging in this work. I've been very fortunate to have traveled pre-pandemic, more in a period of 3 years than I had ever traveled in my life. And I was spending time with other Indigenous peoples on many different sides of the Pacific. Every single one of us in these exchanges is speaking from our own respective center of the world. So when I'm a guest in someone else's homelands, I follow their protocols. If I don't know what those are, I seek out people who do. And I just want to kind of reflect that back to some of the things that have been coming up in the chat, because I see a genuine desire to like want to be in good relationship, right? Not only with the places that people are living, because like, let's be real, colonialism is a global thing, and like many people have been displaced from their homelands, and we're all in this place together now. So I think that like, in order to move forward in these ways, or in this work impactfully, there needs to be a consideration of how slow and deliberate it is. And it has to be scalable. Like how the respect that I engage with women in my community, respect that I engage in with my fellow, like my cohorts at UC Davis, the respect that I engage in with the people that I come into contact with in my day-to-day life, that is what guides those kinds of relationships. And you can't force that. You can't rush it. You can't make it immediately be something that is immediately easy to access. Like, I think one of the biggest things that I'm seeing this unfold in the chat, it needs to start with education, and it needs to start with an intentional knowledge of like who you are, what your points of access are, how are you actively benefiting from the history that we have outlined here, and then move from there. How do you want to be in good relationship? I see people talking about wanting to include a percentage of the money that they're paying for the mortgage for their house to the community whose land that they're living on. Like, that is, again, we're adapting to the ways that things are now. You know, at different points we may have exchanged other things, but right now money is very useful in order to get by in our day-to-day. So like, I see that desire there, and I think that there just has to be a willingness to like be humble, to approach one another in conversation, and also be willing to hear no. Like, consent also has to be a huge reparative part of this conversation, because everything that has happened thus far has happened without Indigenous people's consent.
You know, Sarah, that's a really good point. You know, yesterday I was talking to some friends of mine and colleagues, and they said, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I said, "I'm just going to bulleting, putting some outlines on because I'm going to speak tomorrow." And I was telling them what we're talking about, and they said, "You know, that there's some perfect examples." He goes, in terms of help that we need for funding. He says, you know, recently what they did was, I can't name the tribe's name and I can't name the individuals, but they said that, you know, they do cultural monitoring, and there were some archaeologists that came and said, "Hey, what would work really well for you guys? How can we help you?" And they're from a university. They said, "Oh, we need help with the software program. Oh, we could build that for you. Tell us everything that you need." And so they told them everything that they needed, and they helped them set it up and everything. And then these archaeologists turned around and opened up a business, and now they're charging all tribes $35,000 for this software program. And these are the kind of things is when we trust individuals and say, "Oh, how can I help you?" But then they want to turn around, and this is happening like right now. So I'd had community members call me and said, "Deb, how can we raise money so we can develop our own software program, and then we can give it out for free to all the tribes?" And because this is a tool that we need in terms of documenting certain land locations, you know. So this is a real life thing, you know. For myself as an individual, you know, I've had to build relationships, or not had to. I've been very lucky to build relationships with individuals, and I won't call them out and name them, but they're you know, there is a family that's here on, you know, listening to the program right now that has extended, you know, in our homeland has extended. They know we're landless, and they've extended their home. They've extended their property where we can gather, where we can do the things that we in terms of caretaking. And so, but you have to build those kind of relationships. And there's all these, and like Sarah said, be understanding of the things that we do in terms of rules and protocols, you know, etc. People will say, "Well, oh, well, we'll give you access to go gather over here," but it's like, have they sprayed chemicals there? What are they feeding the plants? What are they, you know, there's all the, and, you know, Rebecca, you're in SEBA, you know, all those things that we face in terms of, you know, when we go out and we gather, you know, the things, the dangers that we have of just going to certain, you know, land properties, because a lot of people spray chemicals. And so down the road, it impacts us that way too. So, you know, we're completely encroached by all these social ills of things that are being done to the land, you know. And if you can I know if you'd elaborate on it, you're part of our team here, so if you can elaborate on that, that would be great.
Absolutely. What Deb was speaking to was, I was the executive director at California Indian Bass Weavers Association, and you know, land access isn't one thing. It's safety in terms of, even when we're accessing land, maybe we're physically safe in that nobody is standing in our way. We're not being threatened by, you know, guns or angry people, but also, like, what are we accessing in terms of that that natural resource? Is it safe? Is it something that we can, you know, use that isn't going to give us mouth cancer, or, you know, things like that once we actually start using it. One of the things that I was kind of unpacking while we were talking too is, I know that a lot of people because I do work in philanthropy, we go through, what is it? It's like what is the acronym of that's popular now? It's BIPOC. Like everyone's, we're all talking about BIPOC, or we're talking about these concepts of like free, prior, and informed consent. And it's like, oh, if we have, if we as an agency, or we as a nonprofit, or we as an organization, or like farmers, or that, if we have this idea of, okay, we're giving these rights to Indigenous people to self-determine and like to participate, like just having that on paper isn't enough. And what I'm hearing from Sarah and Leah and Deb and Brianna is, just because you have that quote unquote policy, what does it look like in real life? It is like a relationship. It's not just because we're married, now we have to just get along no matter what. There is a duty to not just have this policy and say, okay, we have this policy, but what does it actually look like? Do those things hurt us when we stand behind like those policies and procedures? Or, I guess I just want to unpack that a little bit more. Brianna, do you want to speak to that at all?
Just to clarify my understanding, exactly what policies and policies are like, like governmental policies.
So I think, so one of the things that I run into all the time is, when people are talking about working with Indigenous people and giving them access to things, or giving them funding, or helping them develop something, like Deb said, like software and such, like this idea of like, where does self-determination is great, but where do you see that self-determination being defined in a way that is that doesn't actually serve you? Does that make sense? Like we tell people when people are working with us as Indigenous people, oh, we're going to give you the right to self-determination and this and that, but like where have you come into contact with what your idea of self-determination is, or your idea of what your rights are versus what their defined ideas are? And I don't know if that is clear.
No, yeah, that's clear. Thank you. I appreciate that. No, and I think that, Sarah has touched on that, Debbie has touched on that, where it's not so much this like one-way transaction, right? Where it's like, just because you're going to help us with something, or we enter into this relationship, it doesn't mean that we need to stay in it. And it also doesn't mean that you get to extract from it, right? Like it's constantly this give and take. I do think that, especially with the focus on diversity nowadays, like that can enter a lot of Indigenous groups and other, minority groups into kind of sticky situations. And it's hard to navigate sometimes, because some companies, groups, some entity may just want that like one piece, right? For like, we worked with you, we have this representation, we're helping, under recognized communities, and then it's this one project, and then you don't hear from them again, or they got what they needed out of it, it's done. I think if any group, business, company, entity is wanting to work with us, is to be a lasting relationship ideally, but one where we're benefiting from each other. Like, it's this give and take, not that just because you're helping us, it's something that is expected. And then you leave because you got that representation, you got the article, you got to post that you worked with this Indigenous group. I think that's really important, that we don't feel tokenized, and we don't feel used, because I think that happens even with people with the best intentions. Even at work, when I asked for a few hours to do this, they were like, oh, well, can we post about it? Like, maybe you should text our marketing team. I was like, well, the talk's tomorrow. So like, no one's probably going to be able to, like, it's so last minute. They're like, well, no, just so we can put out that we have that representation. And I was like, this is a little weird. I was like, yeah, I'll consider that. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
But it's those where I think she was probably well-meaning. It's at the same time, you can have those undertones with us where it's like, what do you really want out of that though?
Mhm.
Like, as you as a company who employs mostly white older men,
Mhm.
really are wanting out of that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that's what I would have to say that is most important in these.
So did you want to say something, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I think
Something, but if you want, I'm going to let the younger ones go first. So, did you want to say something?
So I think to start, it's like a lot of Indigenous people have what I like jokingly call PTTD, post-traumatic disorder. So I'm like, signing papers has a very particular weight, not just because of that kind of legacy of how papers, right, documents, a kind of fixed agreement has been weaponized against Indigenous people, but also because this is not like, I heard this reflected in everything that everyone was saying. Our sovereignty as Indigenous peoples is mobile. It is in conversation, in negotiation, in collaboration with other peoples, whether they are Indigenous to this land or they have relationships to other places. It is inherently mobile. It is inherently flexible. It requires intention and care and engagement. And that's something that's really challenging to have mapped on paper. When I mentioned earlier being able to kind of visit these other places, I did so with 4 other Indigenous curators from nations in Aotearoa and Samoa and Central Canada. And having conversations with galleries or other institutions where they're like, okay, we'll work with you as a collective. This looks really cool. Like, this makes us look really cutting edge that we're like inviting an Indigenous collective to like curate this exhibition at the Vancouver Art Gallery or at a gallery in Australia. But when it comes down to actually how Indigenous peoples work, not only were we in completely different places, right? We make decisions by consensus.
Mm-hmm.
So when you send someone an email like, hey, we want to move forward with this thing and we need a response in 48 hours, I'm like, that's not realistic for Indigenous people, because not only we're not making those decisions just for us, we have to consult with trusted mentors and elders and with tribal leadership. It's not just a decision that you're making for one person. So like having that kind of flexibility or that understanding that there are maybe going to be different aspects of how that policy needs to be implemented in order to actually respect the ways that Indigenous knowledge functions, right? It's inherently collaborative. There was something else I wanted to say, but it's gone, so I'll pass the mic.
I should touch on also Sarah's, I live by the rule of sacred is secret. And, there are some things like, that, I've been taught is, you go out and we have our places that we gather at. We gather those things that we need. We have our rules and our protocols that we live by. And, you don't really, there's a lot to it than just, you're not just going out and like, I'll say like gathering acorns, I was out gathering acorns. And there was a woman that came up to me and she wanted to know like every process that there was and what did I do and how did I eat him and what did he, and just everything. And I just said, well, it's a lengthy process. After I get my acorns all done, I might bring you back some meal, and she says, well, if you don't tell me, how am I supposed to learn? And it's like, I was gathering these acorns and it was a certain kind of acorn and it was a certain location and it was for ceremony. And so I live by sacred is secret. But what happens is some people just feel like, well, I have rights. I have rights to have all this knowledge. And it's like, no, you don't have rights to have, this is our cultural value. This is our cultural way. This is for our ceremonies, and I live by sacred is secret. Now there's other things, I have some friends that have said, yeah, now, you know, up north, people have learned how to gather acorns, and they're going up there and they're raiding all of all of their acorns that they use to eat all year round. And now there's someone selling acorn. You could buy acorn, you know. Those are things that we have that we need to sustain ourselves. You know, so I just think that, you know, they're like what Sarah said, you know, we just like everything else. We have rules, we have protocols that we live by. And there are some things that we don't talk about. And, you know, and I live by the rule, once you know, you have to be responsible, and sacred is secret. So there are some things that are just completely off limits in terms of even talking here, you know, on the panel. You know, I told some of the individuals that I spoke to that I said I was doing this, and I said, you know, I've never done this before. I've never spoken on a panel before, you know, especially in a box like this. But I want to be very intent and very careful with what I say, because I carry responsibility for all of our families. So, you know, and I think that all of us feel the same way. So that's all I wanted to say about that, you know. But, you know, our stuff, our things that we have that we need to sustain ourselves, they're over harvest. You know, you look at our salmons, you know, our salmon people, our rivers have been dried up and waters have been rerouted for other purposes. And so all of the things that we have you know, our people are they're gone. You know, our Salinas River is gone. Our salmon people are gone. So those are things that we pray for and pray about every day, in terms of not just ourselves as human beings, but the world itself. So I'm done.
And Deb, I think in fact is that the reason why we have sacred or secret is because of the commodification of our resources.
Yes. Yes.
Tell someone something, you know, like it's the next thing at Sprouts and Whole Foods. Mm-hmm. And then those resources dwindle for those of us that have been using them for thousands of years, and then we no longer have access to them, or we don't have the capital to commercially grow these items or the spaces, and we wouldn't, because we don't commodify or capitalize on our resources. And what happens is once we share, oftentimes that information is capitalized, and we no longer have access to our own things. It's already difficult, and then to once it's commodified, it becomes even more difficult to access materials or resources that we utilize on a daily basis, and so to be conscious of that, and you know, I always I have this TikTok obsession. So I was on herbal TikTok. I don't know how I got in there, but anyway, and there was this person that says, oh, you know, I learned from a environmental therapist that that elderberries are good for you and blah, 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 blah. And she wrote this book on it last year. And I'm like, wrote a book on it last year? That's like old news. But the idea that everybody that takes something and commodifies it, whether it's a therapist or an herbalist or, you know, someone trying to do the next, what do they call those? Influencers, social media influencers, right? And that's why we're so protective. And I think Sarah brought it up, is that, you know, sometimes people have to be willing to hear no. And that makes you a good ally when you can hear that and understand it.
Yeah.
That's kind of allyship that Indigenous communities that they're looking for, is those people that don't have strings. Well, I gave you, so therefore I expect this in return. Our reciprocity was generalized. Normally in our community, it wasn't balanced reciprocity. It was generalized. You don't keep tabs on what you do for people. You just do for your community. You just do what needs to be done. And if someone has something that you have and they need it, you just give it. There's no strings attached. And so, I know that in our community or in Northern Chumash, general reciprocity is a value, and we still value that, operating under that mindset. And so sometimes when an exploitation happens out of a conversation, we tend to retreat and not want to share. And given the frameworks that Sarah set the whole session on, you can understand there's a long history of not being able to trust people. Yes, I do TikToks. I'm learning, for whoever in the chat. I'm not good at it, but yeah, it's another way to engage with people. In native TikTok's wonderful if people are looking for additional education. It's really hard to hear some of the content, but if you want to be a good ally, I think listening to Indigenous people is the first step.
Yeah, no, Leah, I'm glad you touched on that, because for our families, I look at the land base that our families had, and you look at joint families that we had in our homeland, and then like right now we're landless. So the relationships that we do build together are acorns, our elderberries, our medicines, and those things. We do have to protect them and be responsible. Recently, and Sarah knows, we have a place where we gather our elderberries, and I had a relative tell me just like 2 months ago, they're like, Deb, they burned your tree down. They burned your family tree down. And I'm like, what? And this was a really old tree, and the whole tree was just burned down. I think it was burned because people were living there. They need a place to live. But, knowing that was a relative of ours that we took care of, and we took care of throughout the whole year. And this happened. It was pretty horrifying. It's very horrifying. But for myself, kind of put things in perspective. I was born in 1955. I'm 65 years old. I'm going to be 66 in a couple of weeks. And so if you look at the time period that I grew up in, the historical perspective of, and in the context, you look at how my grandpa grew up, how my dad grew up, and how I grew up, and knowing, what our family, what we did, and how we still do things in those same ways, but we were like this in terms of being able to do things in our homeland, and now our space is like this, and we need to have those foods to sustain ourselves. Those are rules that we live by. My grandfather said, you have to eat this so many times a week. You have to eat this. You have to do that. And what Leah said is that we gathered for the whole community, and we give out for the whole community. I think this year was the first year that we didn't have a whole bunch of people coming together for ceremony. So, I had to mail elderberry out to people from all over post office. I had to be adaptive and be creative. But I think putting that in perspective in terms of in order for us to sustain as people, we need to have a land base. We need to have a land base to, because that connects us to the land. The land knows us, and for us to be able to live as living Indians and live and do the things that we're responsible for, we have to have a land base. And where our gathering spaces are like this right now versus the space that we were able to gather in all our villages. Sarah, did you want to say anything at all, like maybe even about some of our examples of how things were just torn away from our families, you know, lousy examples of how things were just completely just taken away, you know? I don't know.
Well, villages that our family is from throughout our homeland have been really impacted by multiple industries. So it kind of began with the mission system. They're still working cattle ranches throughout there. Hearst Corporation is still one of the biggest landowners near some of our northern villages. Some of our land is enclosed within a National Guard outpost or a military base. Some of our villages are underwater because of dams that were built. You know, I feel like a lot of us, and this has kind of been iterated throughout, you know, we're kind of trying to maintain very complex networks that I mentioned before, span ecosystems and span nations, right? It's like this is part, an understanding of kind of borders between territories being like a harsh line is like not actually resonant with Indigenous worldviews. Those are Leanne Betasamasake Simpson, who's an Indigenous author, uses this phrase where it's like, no, these are sites of heightened negotiation. These are places where we build kinship relationships, right? So you make sure you have good marriages or good unions between those communities in order to move freely through those spaces. I think that that's actually something that could, and I mentioned this before, it's like to really frame any ideas for these kinds of collaborations to like make sure it's equitable. And like in order to do that, you need to really look at your points of access. And to really be a good visitor or a good guest or somebody who also has like, because I don't want to speak over the relationships to place that people develop. And like the importance of people having an understanding of home. I mean, I want to respond to the question that Thomas just stated about Black and African American farmland and Black land ownership. I think that it has served the United States to create tensions between Indigenous peoples of the Americas and displaced Indigenous peoples from the continent of Africa. There is definitely conversations, negotiation, collaboration, good relationships that need to be built in that space. But I also think it's like a really generative possibility to kind of heal some of those damages that have really been inflicted by and benefit colonial nations. Feel free to look me up online. I would be happy to have more conversation with you about that because I think it's a very important question, and it's showing again that that genuine intention to kind of enter into good relationship with one another. Yeah, so thank you for that question. I know there's lots more questions. We're coming up on like 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you.
I think we're wrapping up. Please, I have put my email in the chat box, rtortoise@firstnations.org. I'm happy to answer any questions, send you to the right people, share your questions with other people in the community if they should come up. I think that one of the things that I just want to close with again is just remember that, you know, that the things that you see through the media and, you know, the experts that you see, that's just like the little teeny top of the iceberg of what like California Indigenous knowledge really is and what those relationships look like. And that, you know, if you do want to be an advocate, you have to dig much deeper than just the top of that iceberg. And you have to be willing to be uncomfortable and to step into those spaces and to sometimes hear things that you don't want to hear, but that, you know, there's a lot to learn, and, you know, there are some things that we will share with you, and there are some things that we will always just keep for ourselves. And that is the way that we live our lives. So I want to thank Deb, Sarah, Leah, and Brianna so much for your time. And I want to thank the people from Eco Farms Conference for inviting us to be here. And again, I shared my email in the chat, and thank you so much for your time. And it is 1, so I'm going to end this. Thank you so much.
Sumakini, wali sali.
Nos vemos.
Oh.
You guys are great. You guys, thank you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah. Are we completely off from everyone now?
Yes, we're off. So I will send a follow-up email. Thank you so much. Oh, you can still hear us. Okay.
Well, I just, Brianna, I'm just really glad that you had the opportunity of getting 2 hours off of work, to do this. And I'm really glad you experienced what you experienced, because, oh my goodness, that was a perfect example. Those are things that we have to work with all the time. So, I just thought that.
Hey, can I get a picture of all of us on the screen right now?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, let me flap my.
Is that okay with everyone?
Fix my shoulder. Yeah.
Because we can't.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. That came here too.
We're still,
I don't do pictures, but I will do.
We're still online, so just anything that's being said right now is still being broadcasted. So
it's okay. Just want to take a picture together. So you got it.
All right, guys.
There we go.
1, 2, 3. Awesome.
So Rebecca, we
Thanks
just
so much,
want to really
guys.
thank you, because you helped us in terms of, this is our first time of all of us working together. So you did a superb job of helping us navigate through this. So I just want to say thank you. And then with Sarah and Leah and Brianna, I'm really honored to have been part of this panel, because I've never spoken on a panel about our things ever before. And this is like the first time Leah knows. I mean, I always just, I stay away from these kind of things. And I have community members always telling me, oh, you have to get out there. You have to do it. You have to do it. And I'm like, no. So, but I felt very comfortable working with you guys. So I just want to say, to the 4 of you, I had a really good time.
Thank you so much. What a lovely way to end my week. And I hope you guys all have a beautiful weekend and enjoy the rain.
Yes, you as well.
Okay.
Wonderful. And then Kathleen, I think she can stop us recording. Okay, thank you. I'm leaving now officially.
Bye, guys.
Oh, they're still recording it.
Yeah.
How did they stop the recording?
All right. See you.
Okay, we'll talk later. We'll
Bye,
talk
everyone.
in a different.
Yeah.
Okay, take care.
Yeah.